Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. People are going to come and go according to their schedules. And if you haven't already grabbed a copy of the 2005 exam, go ahead and do that. But the plan from the start was that the first review, we talk about some material. Second review, we talk about more material. And then today would be a day to go over questions. Okay? Although those two things aren't usually exclusive. You talk about material when you're answering questions and you're trying to judge what the best answer is. And last time we were here, that was an example. There was an example of that. We got to some questions where they were good jumping off points. We're talking about fiscal and monetary policy, and I drew a lot of the stuff on the board. And that stuff's been recorded, and it's on YouTube. That brings me to a couple of general announcements that you could see if you were on Blackboard right now. Don't feel like you have to go, but if you want to, you can. If you go to Blackboard, Spring 2011 Eagle Business class, doesn't matter which semester you've taken the class, you should all be there. You should all have that class. And if you click on the course calendar, and then you go to today at 1:30, this is what you'll see. Some information that I just want to review with you. Okay, some of this stuff, a lot of this stuff, you already know. If you heard it earlier today, I apologize for sounding redundant, but I'm going to say the same thing for the people that are here from last semester. First thing is, the first link will take you directly to the part of AP Central, the College Board website, that has sample multiple choice questions. Okay, there's 21 questions I believe they have online. Like it says here, you need to scroll to page 32 in that PDF file to get to the part that has multiple choice questions. These multiple choice questions are not online. Ones online are quote-unquote samples. But if you have copies of the past exam, which gets released every 5 years like I do, you'll say, hey, those samples, they're either exactly like or they're almost exactly like some of these past questions that have been asked. So it's just an extra resource for you because every time we go through these exams, I always collect them back. All right, there's something that you can kind of, digitally put your hands around and it's not going to be taken back from you, okay? And it's a pretty good cross-sampling of the different topics that are going to be on the exam. All right, so that's the first link, but make sure you scroll down to page 32 because if you don't, and if you just go to the first section that you see multiple choice questions for, it's going to be micro questions, okay? So don't get confused. Same thing with that book. If you happen to have bought one, 5 Steps to Getting a 5, they combine micro and macro material in there. It's easy to get confused and tripped up. You shouldn't need to buy something like that. You don't need to buy something like that. If you have already, or if somebody has one and you feel like borrowing, once you've studied all your notes already and you've gone through the stuff you've already done, then sure, if you want to, go ahead and use that as an extra resource. But don't feel like it's going to replace, or that it even needs to replace any of the learning you've already done. Okay? All right. Past FRQs, along with the answers and explanations, can also be found on the College Board website. So I'm going to show you those in a few minutes if you haven't seen those. And then, of course, video and audio of lectures and reviews from this semester can be found in the third link. So you can try to find these things on your own, and I know that most of you are smart enough to, you're savvy enough to, but frankly, they can be very difficult to find without just using these links. Like the multiple choice questions, there's no place on the AP site that says, click here for multiple choice questions. It says, like in parentheses, multiple choice questions are within the course description. So make your life easy, use these links. Okay. So of course the AP exam is this Thursday. It's 7:30. It's in the Media Center for everybody but Dylan. Things to remember for the AP exam. No calculators are allowed. Do not bring calculators. Also, you should bring several sharpened number 2 pencils for the multiple choice section. If you have 1 or 2 pencils and they break or something's a problem, it's not worth the stress of pushing it and going, I'm only going to bring 1. You don't want to be that person. So bring a handful of sharpened pencils. Bring black and blue pens for the FRQs. There's no whiteout allowed, so don't bring any. Don't bring any correction fluid. It's also recommended that you bring a watch, if it helps you keep track of time more easily rather than craning your neck and looking for the clock. I've been told that there's a clock not just in the back of the Media Center, but in the front now for AP testing. So if that's the case, you shouldn't even need to bring a watch, but it's something to think about. If you bring a watch, make sure it makes no sound, okay? All right.
So, how does the test break down? What portion of your final grade is a multiple choice?
The multiple choice, 2/3.
2/3. So that means the FRQs are 1/3, right?
Oh, good.
For the multiple choice, you have 60 questions, 70 minutes to answer them. So that comes to roughly 1:10 on average. Some questions might take you more time because they try to cram, as you know, freaks into these questions. Take some time to sketch. All right, some questions won't take you nearly a minute. So that's just roughly the average you want. And when we go through some questions right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to time you so that you know internally what it feels like to have a minute go by, so you can pace yourself. If you happen to leave, don't leave anything blank in the multiple choice. Okay, for several years in the past, they used to penalize you if you took a guess and you were wrong in the multiple choice. They don't do that anymore. So you're going to leave anything blank, Cameron? No. You're not going to leave anything blank, right?
Do you get points off for your questions at all?
Oh yeah. What do you mean? Do you get them?
No, do you get points off? Do you get points off?
If you contradict yourself, you're not going to get points. Otherwise, you fall down.
Like, you know, you said like when we have like that thing, like, so we have like in the beginning, they say like when a recession, but we go like, in a inflation.
If you start in the wrong point, but your thought process sound from there on, you'll miss early points, but you can still get all the other points.
And you get all of us.
Yeah. So don't quit on a freak. All right, we're not going to quit on freaks. We're not going to leave stuff blank on the multiple choice or the FRQs. If you're not sure about which direction you should take on an FRQ or a part of an FRQ, you still take a stab at it and you follow your logic from there. Maybe you got it wrong in the beginning and you should not have had the Fed increase the money supply. You should have decreased the money supply. Fine, go with it. And then follow your thinking from there on out and don't leave any stones unturned. If you finish the multiple choice section early, go back over your answers, use the complete time that you have been given to check your work. Raise your hand if you've already taken one AP exam. Raise your hand if you've had 2 or more AP exams. So this is what is relatively typical, okay? If you've taken more than one, chances are by Thursday morning you're going to be tired. So no matter how smart you are, if you're tired, it's easy to make mistakes. If you've got extra time for some reason, then go through your test and go through the problems again. You got nothing else to do. You have no cell phone, you have no laptop. This is the one focus that you have. If somebody turns their test in early, their multiple choice, I just want you to remember their name and let me know afterwards who did it.
They don't allow you to.
They don't?
Just sit there.
You're not allowed to? Okay, perfect.
I think this is what's going on.
Dalton Brown still might try. He likes to show off. Not that he gets everything right, he just likes to show people he's a fast test taker. So anyway, all right, good. Let's see here. Write your thoughts in the test book, please. Visualize your answers. Don't just trust your exhausted brain. Okay? Write down in the multiple choice test booklet your thoughts. Now, sometimes you don't need to write down a definition if it's a definition question. Don't waste time unnecessarily. Anytime it's going to require some basic calculations, graphs, something where you have to visualize the answer. It's not just the definition of a term. Be in the habit of just sketching. And over the next day or two, when you're studying, do that too. Practice. Practice putting pen or pencil to paper. All right, moving on to the free response section, 1/3 of your grade. It has a mandatory 10-minute reading or planning period, so you get 2 separate booklets. You get a small booklet that has the question, actually all 3 questions right there. There's no space in between to answer. And then after you plan out what you're going to say, then you're going to get the test. And now you have 50 minutes to do the 3 questions, 1 big, 2 smalls, right? You're not allowed to use pencil or whiteout in the FRQs, so make sure that you have pen, black or dark blue. And what I recommend is that you use black for your starting point and then your blue for any kind of changes, okay? If for some reason you make a mistake, not only do you not quit, but you just scratch it out, okay? But that's why they give you that 10-minute planning period, so that hopefully you don't have one of these days like you may have had or one of your classmates may have had this year where I'm giving a unit test, they come up and they go, do you have another FRQ? I messed up. Because they don't. You're not getting another one. That during that 10-minute planning period, you visualize your answers, you sketch it out, in, shorthand. And you think about your labels for your graphs. That's a great time to think about your labels. If they have a question that's going to, by the time you're done with it, ask you to show a new price level, then you know that when you first put your legend for PL sub 1, you're not going to put current price level. You're going to put initial or starting price level. You're not going to have to cross out your labels. That's why you want to read through and practice the entire question, or plan out the entire question, including your labels for your legend. Okay? All right. And then the last thing is that we have a PDF of notes under course documents. Any questions about the exam overall? How it works? Coaching points?
What's timing again? What's timing?
So 10-minute planning period for the FRQs, and then you get 50 minutes to answer the 3 questions.
50.
5-0.
You don't get a break.
And then what about the multiple choice? It's
Multiple choice, 70 minutes for 60 questions.
And there's no break. So, like
10-minute break in between.
You have a very brief break. Is it 10 minutes?
No, you're gonna have a 10-minute break between the questions and the multiple choice.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's why for US history, you gotta get a time like that.
Oh, you get 10? They let you go outside the room?
Yeah, we had it for 15 minutes like that.
Does that happen with another exam?
Yeah, it's not one every single
All exams get to you.
Okay. What was another exam where that was the case?
Go.
Same thing? 10 minutes, you get to walk out of the room?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
I went in my car and just like
Okay. All right. Good. All right, so let's go over some questions. But before we do, I want to show you these 2 links, just so you just briefly see what they look like. So, sample multiple choice questions. This comes directly from the College Board website. I've got to get all the way down within this course description to page 32. I'm not going to type it in, well, maybe I will. It'll be faster. And then if you blow it up a little bit, you see that these are sample multiple choice questions from the macro part. If you go earlier in the document, it's going to be micro, right? So that's what I was talking about earlier. And then this is also a useful resource. If you scroll down, you see the past 11, 12 years of FRQs. There's no secret. They don't just release it every once in a while. Every year, they release the questions, they show the scoring guidelines, they show some sample answers from students, and they explain, how they graded it and what the score distribution was. So all that stuff's online as well. Going back several years, all right, Form B is an alternate form that they give to people that usually have some kind of a conflict, a scheduling or a time conflict, I believe. Okay. And then the last thing is YouTube, of course. This might be the hardest thing to find on your own, frankly. So that's why I put the link there for you. But you can see both class material and past reviews that we've done. Sometimes it's just audio, because earlier in the semester we didn't have these flip cams. These are something that have been recently acquired by the Social Studies Department. So we were borrowing a camera. And there's a couple of lectures, 2 or 3 class lectures that we've had trouble uploading. I haven't done today's. I've captured it. It's on my laptop, but I haven't uploaded it to YouTube yet. But as recently as today's class, that should be on YouTube in the next 24 hours. Okay? So hopefully this brings back some memories if you feel like you're rusty. Okay. So we're going to answer some questions. Get a booklet if you don't have one. But before we do, is there a certain subject matter you feel urgently needs to be reviewed? Is there something you feel really shaky about, in particular, a particular topic? We can get to it when we stumble upon those questions in the exam.
What was the thing we did before? I was like, remember you had that activity where you had you put things on a different side of the chart? That we did in the library 2 classes ago?
2 classes ago? Are you talking about the balance of payments?
I think so.
T accounts for banking?
No, not. It's like. balance of payments.
Okay. Balance of payments. So you're talking about the current account,
Yeah.
the financial account or capital account, that stuff.
I can understand like all like what that is.
Okay, we can talk about that. If you've got your book, this stuff is in chapter 31, I believe. Where it says international finance. Now there's two components to international finance. There's the balance of payments, and then there is also exchange, currency exchange. Is it 31 for you guys? Do we have books open? Maybe not. Okay. All right. So a couple of things. Turn this off for a second. One of the things you might recall is when it comes to international finance, you have money flowing back and forth in between countries, correct? We start out in class introducing this in the concept of currency and exchange rates. So you have two countries. Let's say you've got country A, you've got country B. And you have the supply and the demand for each currency. Anytime you're in an individual market like this is not an aggregate concept, right? These are individual markets, like you have the market for money, the market for mobile funds, the market for hair products, whatever, right? They all have a particular price. And we just call that price as a label if we don't have a better label than that. But in these areas, we do. For this one, we're going to call this the price of country A's currency. And let's say they're using dollars. It will be the price of the dollar in this other currency. Let's call this the euro. But over here will be the price of the dollar in euros. What would it cost me? Correct? What would it cost me to get a dollar in euros if I'm sending them and exchanging them from this country to that, right? And this is just the quantity of the dollar. Over here, we have the quantity of euros, and this is the price of euros in dollars, okay? And what happens is, you normally operate your life in whatever home country you live using that currency. But if there's something you need the other currency for, let's say you want to buy some products to consume, or something to run your business from. Maybe you want to do some investing in that country, and they don't take your currency. Then money flows, right? And even though there is no such thing, we try to visualize this process by saying, imagine that there's a bank in the middle of the ocean somewhere. It's not tied to any one country. The reality is different. The reality is you go to a bank in one of these countries, or you go to the airport on your way to another country, you exchange currencies. But it kind of helps to imagine it this way, some independent entity that's got all the different currencies of the world stored up in there. And let's say that you're European and you want to buy an iPhone produced in California. And let's just say that, the only way for you to do it is to send your money over there and purchase that good. So what's going to happen here, this country, whoever it is that wants to buy those iPhones, is going to supply their currency to this bank and exchange it for dollars, because we don't take euros for normal everyday transactions in the United States, right? If you're somebody that's here on vacation even, you're a European, you go, oh yeah, I want to go to the Apple store. Or let's make it a little more realistic. I want to go to In-N-Out. because that's something you can't live without, right? Especially when you're in California, Southern California. Are they going to take euros there? No. You have to trade your currency at some point before you walk in and say, give me a double-double. So you got to trade the currency in. You have to demand those dollars, right? You're going to increase the demand for dollars, that's going to send the price up, which we also call the value. And what's going to happen to the value of the dollar? It's going to increase or appreciate. Appreciate. What about over here? The value is going to decrease or depreciate. And that's just one of several examples we can use to show how money flows back and forth between countries, right? So this much makes sense at this point? I'm going to get to the balance of payments in just a second, but this concept makes sense, right?
So the demand increases, the supply decreases.
So what happens is, anytime you have these two currencies, doesn't matter what the countries are, side by side, right? The demand for one currency is tied to the supply curve of the other currency, and the same thing for these two. I'll put triangles around them, and you just visualize perhaps that they're part of the triangle family, and these are part of the square family. If one moves right, so does the other. They're tied on a string. Okay, they're tied on a string. Yeah?
So basically, like, you're going from euros, you're decreasing the money supply because you're taking that into the bank and you're using that money.
The amount of currency in your country, yeah, you're exchanging it. You're trading it in.
Dollars, which is increasing the demand.
Right, so let's say that Miklos is American, I'm European, and Nicole is this fictional bank in the middle of the ocean, and I say, well, I need some of those dollars. I'm going to supply you with my euros and say, in exchange for that, I'm demanding dollars. The transaction happens, and if there's something significant where there's a net change in those kinds of transactions, then that causes the currency of this country to become devalued or to depreciate, and this one will appreciate, right? Now, there are factors in your book, specifically, that talk about, what could cause money to flow from one country to another. But before I talk about that, are we cool with this? We get this concept, right? The way that you don't have to do it my way. If you've got a way to always get the right answer for a question like this that works for you, then that's fine. The way that makes sense to me, so that's why the way I teach it is I start with, which country needs the currency? Europeans need our currency. They're going to be the suppliers. So I always start with the supply curve. Whoever needs the currency is going to be supplying their currency to trade it in for the other currency, to demand the other currency. So I always start with the supply curve, I shift that to the right, and then I know that the other demand curve is also going to move to the right. That's how I always find the answer. If you got another way of doing it, then stick with what works for you. Now the question is, how do you figure out which way money flows? There's a couple of factors mentioned in your book. One is real interest rates. Another one is inflation. Another one is income. Those are three major factors that determine which way money flows. Okay? And money flows where money grows, or where it's more powerful, where it can become more powerful. Okay, so let's take the first one, real interest rates. And it's all about comparison, okay? Because if you have country A paired up with country X instead of country B, it might be a different situation. So it's always specific to the two countries that we're talking about. Like if you say, so is Mr. Gideon an outstanding athlete? It depends on who you're comparing me to. If you're going to compare people, like, compare me to my son, or the kid that's in his average grade at Castle Bay, I'm going to look like a superstar. Compare me to some of the people that I know, I'm going to be like, ugh, Gideon, poor guy. Old, fat, slow. So it's all about comparisons, okay? All right. So first of all, real interest rate. Let's say both countries' real interest rates go up. And you remember that the real interest rate can be shown in the loanable funds market. Oops. Right, you have the supply of loanable funds, demand for loanable funds. Here's a real interest rate. Quantity of loanable funds. Looks different than the money market. Because in the short term, remember this is greater than 1 year. Oops, this is less than 1 year.
God bless you.
Bless you. The money supply is relatively fixed. And that's also why the interest rate gets a different name. Just plain old I for interest, nominal interest rate. Oops. Okay. So in this market, this is a place where people take loans out. We talk a lot about that. But this is also a place where people put their money hoping that it will grow. Okay? So if the real interest rate goes up, faster in country A than country B, which way is money going to flow? Will it flow into country A like this?
Yeah.
Or will it flow into country B? It'll flow into A. Money goes where it's going to grow. Okay? So for this kind of situation, okay, real interest rate would be greater in A for this to happen. If the real interest rate was greater in country B, it would flow the other way. You'd have supply shift to the right here. You'd have demand shift to the right there. And I'm going to give you just one example so that the graph stays the same. Okay? What about inflation and incomes? Which country would have to have greater inflation for money to flow from country B to country A?
B. Yeah, B, because if the prices are higher in country A, people aren't going to want to pay that much. And so
If
they're higher
prices go up faster here than here, is money going to want to go over there and try to buy the more expensive stuff?
No, it's going to go to the one with the
No.
lower inflation.
If money wants to go someplace where it can be powerful, whether it grows as an investment or it can purchase more products for the same amount of that currency, right, then inflation would have to be greater in this country. Right? Prices go up here, but things are still comparatively cheaper. So you would have to have inflation going up in country B.
For the money to go
Yeah.
there.
For this same directional flow to happen. Go from B to A.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would it make sense, like, if you think of it this way, like, if you're in country B and there's like an increasing inflation rate in A, wouldn't you want to put your money into A so you have more? Like, you have more.
Yeah, that's what we just said.
Like, so if whichever country has more, like, has a higher inflation rate, you want to put it.
Money's going to run out of that country.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. If A has a higher inflation rate, why don't you put it in
If
A?
A has a higher inflation
Well,
rate? No, I didn't say that.
What he's saying
B
is,
has a higher inflation.
what he's saying is just to think of it this way instead of just like for this process to happen, like the money will flow into the country with a lower inflation rate.
Fine. You want to think of it like that? You get the same answer.
Not what you're
No,
trying to say.
I was thinking like a higher inflation rate, because wouldn't you get more for
No, because inflation.
Okay,
the
now
price
think of
is
the
higher.
purpose of the money, okay? The purpose of the money here is to grow like in a savings account. Purpose here is to buy stuff. So what's happening here is you have investors putting their money in savings vehicles. Here, we're not talking about that kind of a transaction. We're talking about people buying goods and services from each other, right? And where are you going to want to buy stuff? The cheapest country you can find. If these are the only two countries on earth, hypothetically, then you're going to want to buy stuff from country A because prices are lower. It's a different kind of thing. These are not all investor scenarios. Does that make sense? Okay? These two are much more alike, actually, in that way. Because it's a very similar thing with incomes, right? If incomes go up faster in one country than another, then those people whose incomes are going up faster,
Then they're going to flow into the other country.
That's exactly
because they have
right.
more money to spend.
That's exactly right. So what's going to happen on this? Do we need country B's incomes to go up faster than A or A faster than B? That's correct. Their incomes need to rise faster, or maybe incomes in this country don't change at all. It doesn't really matter as long as they win, as long as their incomes are going up and there's a gap in that rate between that country and this country. Now, if you want money to flow back in the other direction, right, then the opposite of all this stuff needs to happen. And the way that I always think about it is that supply shifts to the right first. So if we had the opposite of all this, if we said that real interest rates are going up faster in country B, if we said that inflation was taking place perhaps in both countries, but they're going up faster in country A, prices are, or let's say incomes are rising faster in country A, all of those things would cause money to flow toward country B. And you would have this supply curve shift to the right, and this demand curve shift to the right. And if it's still sinking in, you have it on video. You know, YouTube. Okay? Perfect. All right. Now, these are not the only situations where money flows. These are the situations that affect the value of currencies, but these are not the only situations where money flows back and forth between countries. Okay? In the really big picture, that's where the balance of payments comes in. Balance of payments. Now, in my older edition, the example of the balance of payments is on 676. I think for you guys it's 700 or 710. Okay? But for the balance of payments, we're tracking all of the money flowing to and from a certain country for all kinds of reasons. Some of it happens because of this. Some of it happens because people are purchasing. There's other reasons too. Money flows out of a country, sometimes not hoping to improve their own financial situation, just because they want to do the right thing. All right? Let's say this country is, the United States, and this is Japan, and we send money because we want to help them recover from the earthquake and the tsunami and the nuclear fallout, all the above, right? That would be reflected in the balance of payments. So there are other things other than trying to make your own personal life situation better that would dictate the flow of money from country to country, right? So the balance of payments is supposed to reflect everything, all of the reasons and all the directions that money flows in and out of one country, right? Now they break this up into a couple of areas. First we have the current account. This is the one that most people would associate with trade, okay? So we talk, is it on 710, Miklos?
Yeah.
The chart,
Yeah.
mine looks like this.
Yeah, it's everything.
Okay, so it looks like this. It's got some basic accounting. It's got debits and credits. So current account, capital account, official reserve account, and then the statistical discrepancy, that's what I'm looking at. I don't know which term they're going to use on the AP exam Thursday, whether it's going to be capital account or it'll be investment account. This is a more recent term that surfaced in economics, but it'll be one of the two. You have the reserve account, and you have something called statistical discrepancy. Okay. At the very bottom of adding up all of the transactions, all the money flowing back and forth in and out of a country, at the very end, when you take all these positives and negatives, you should have 0 at the end. That's part of the reason you have this safety net called statistical discrepancy, because the reality is, if you could track everything, you wouldn't need that category, but everything up above that should cancel out. All the positives and negatives should cancel out, okay? So typically this is, let's say 10, 15, 20 billion dollars, something like that, but not bad if you're tracking all of the money that's coming and going from a country like ours which is worth several trillion dollars. Okay? So let's get back to the top. Current account, this is the one that usually gets the most questions asked on the AP exam, and it's the one that most people associate with the headlines. So one of the things that your book talks about when it breaks this up into 3 boxes, in my book, I don't know if it fits on the same page with you, but at the very bottom when it says current account, it has 3 boxes: exports of goods and services, imports of goods and services, and net unilateral transfers abroad. Okay? Now when you see these numbers that are over off to the side, they have positives and negatives. The positives are debits or credits? Credits. And the negatives are debits. Let's pretend for a minute you have some plastic card that goes in your purse or your wallet, and you use it for financial transactions. If it is a credit card, does that mean that money comes into that account or goes out from that account? Comes into. You got a credit card, somebody says, a bank, we're going to issue you a Chase credit card for $10,000. They're spotting you $10,000. They're saying, look, we're going to put this money in the account. There's no such thing as free. You got to pay interest on it, all right? So money coming in, good way of thinking of that is a credit like you would have for a credit card. A debit card is different, right? You're supposed to already have the money sitting there, and every time you use the credit card, excuse me, the debit card, money is subtracted from your account. So maybe that'll help you remember the difference between debits and credits. And every time you have a positive number over here, that's a credit. If we have a negative number, it's known as a debit. Okay? So, under the current account, exports of goods and services. We're tracking money. We're not tracking products. We're not tracking the iPhone. We're tracking the money in exchange for the iPhone. So let's say we export iPhones to China. Let's say they're buying and using our iPhones. Is that going to be a debit or a credit for us? It's a credit for us because they're going to have to send us their yuan to pay for that iPhone or the, thousands of iPhones that they're going to be using from us. Okay? So an export would be one of these, and that goes in the current account. If you have an import, you're importing, just about anything you're wearing right now. Probably got produced in another country. How would you record that in the U.S. balance of payments? It's a debit or a credit. As a debit. All right? So imports, in my book, they throw a fictional number down of, I want to do exports first. Let's do exports first. They have a number, 340 billion. So that'd be a positive 340 billion. Comes into our country as a credit in exchange for what we export out. All right, I'm going to give you the shorthand. I'm not going to go line by line because I don't want to spend our whole block on this. But it could be merchandise, services, or income from assets abroad. Okay? So think of it as ways to make money. Yes?
So on the AP test, how would they ask a question about this? Just they'd show a graph or something? They'd show a chart of it?
Not typically. They might give you a section of this. Usually they don't ask you anything about the whole thing. All right? They'll ask about a piece of this. They'll say, all right, so here are some figures. Figure out what the balance is for the current account. And you go, well, I know. They give me some numbers for exports, numbers for imports. They give me some numbers for net unilateral transfers abroad. Then they give me something like an increase in the U.S. official reserve asset account. You're not going to use that because it's not included in the current account. So this is really just memorization. It's not going to be graphs. It's just how do you do some basic math and how do you know what goes where. Okay, it's basic accounting, but it's international trade accounting, international finance. Okay, imports would be a debit for us, and the number they use in our book is negative 390. All right, see ya. And this is normally what we focus on in the media when we talk about our trade imbalance with other countries. Okay? If this is a net negative number, then we have a trade imbalance. We are importing, the value of the stuff that we're importing is greater than the stuff that we're exporting. This is actually not nearly as big a difference as it is in reality, using the numbers in your book.
On the
Refonomics,
thing.
where
It's
it
like-
uses the actual
I
numbers.
think it was in Australia.
Yeah, it's very significant. Now that's a few years old. That's several years old. You could go today. You would see that just for the last quarter, the negative that we had, very significant, came down a little bit, but there's still a very significant gap for us.
It's in the billions.
Oh yeah, several billion. But here's another number. Net unilateral transfers abroad. So what are ways that money would be transferred? This says it all in the book. So you just got to know it from your readings. If somebody is an American, let's say this is the U.S. balance of payments, and they are living in another country, and for some reason the government is sending them money, right? Or a U.S. citizen, somebody from the United States is sending them money. In theory, we're supposed to be able to keep track of that some of the time, and that would be a negative number, right? Let's say the U.S. government, let's say my mom, she's about ready to retire. Let's say she says, you know what, I love you, love the grandkids, but I'm going to retire in France, and I'm going to collect Social Security there. Well, when they send her her money, the federal government, then that would be a negative number, that would be a debit. That would be one way, unilateral transfer. They're not buying things from us. There's no exchange in return for that money being sent. It's just, here's the money that you've been paying into the system all these years with the expectation of receiving once you retire. That's not the only kind of unilateral transfer. Maybe it's a situation where we're sending money to Japan. It's still money leaving the country. It's unilateral, it's a transfer. Just like transfer payments, we talk about that, right, in the circular flow, where our federal government sometimes sends money to our state and local governments. This is the same kind of thing where they're sending money to other countries, whether it's for U.S. citizens or residents and governments of that other country. Okay? So that's the current account. Now, the current account is supposed to be the opposite of the capital account. But it doesn't usually work out that way. If you stick with the examples in the book, all right, it's very simple. The capital account, investment account, sometimes it's called the financial account. It's another term. Okay, it just looks at capital, financial capital, not physical capital, financial capital flowing in and out of the country. Inflow and outflow. If it flows in, just like money in exchange for these products and services, it's a plus. If it's an outflow, it's a negative. So if we have, let's say inflow, these are the numbers in your book. 60 inflow, outflow is 16. Okay, in theory, whatever this number is, the flip side is supposed to be over here. But the reality is we can't always track this stuff. Like, we have a housekeeper. She has family in Mexico. She sends a chunk of what we pay her to her relatives in Mexico. Do you think our federal government's tracking that kind of unilateral transfer abroad? No, they're not tracking that. There's no way for them to track that. So what happens is, even though this is supposed to balance from like here on up, it doesn't, because there are gaps in the system, and that's where statistical discrepancy comes in, balances everything in the balance of payments. Yes?
So, that unilateral transfer abroad, so that's just like, isn't it just exports?
No. No, that's just a different kind, that's a different kind of transaction. It's just somebody in one country sending money to somebody in another country and not expecting anything in return.
Oh, it's like just giving them, like putting wire transfer to their account.
That's it.
Birthday present.
Birthday present, my family's poor, our U.S. government decides to help Japan. We're not asking for anything in return.
Oh, that's
That all goes right here. Unilateral, one-way transfers. That's right. If we're going to give, we're going to, I don't know, send money to Africa for AIDS relief or for mosquito nets to protect people from malaria or to fight poverty, it all goes there too. It's all right there. If we feel like Australians are completely unhealthy because they're inactive and they watch too much TV and they're watching our reality shows and we feel guilty about it, we send money to them to help get them off the couch and get them healthy. Same thing, goes right there. All right? All right, so that's balance of payments. Just gotta study it. You gotta memorize. Okay? So let's go to questions. Oh, this is just reserves of these are assets that our government has, an increase or a decrease that our government has in reserve assets.
Is this how in depth you want?
And a lot of times the assets are in foreign currencies, or maybe they hold gold as as an asset that they want to tap into at some point.
Is this how in depth you want it? Because the economics thing was pretty.
More in depth than this.
But this is like what we need to know.
This is what you need to know.
Just the basics, not like.
No, sometimes he goes way. Just so you know, Stephen Ref, he goes more in depth because he has more time to, and in a way he has to kind of do that because his full-time job now that he doesn't teach is to run this nonprofit educational organization where he gets a grant and he goes into as much detail as is humanly possible. That's why, like, for instance, remember the whole thing with Pine Gulch and the creation of money? He tells the entire story, or big chunks of that book. It's not necessary for our class. That's why I skipped some of it in class.
The receipts would be counted as credit.
You're not gonna be asked, like, there's nothing on the AP exam that's going to say, so back in the early Western days, was there a guy named Slim? Or, when they first created money in the United States, paper money, did they use wild green ink on pink paper? Or pink ink on green paper? Or they're not going to ask you that stuff. It's a way to kind of tie a story to the concept of how you can create money, what's a reserve requirement. And so even though that's important, and that's something that I want you to know something about, because this whole class is not just geared for the AP exam, we skip through some of that. So you have what you
The
need.
receipt stuff that he used, that would be counted as credit. Too.
What's that?
Receipt stuff that counted as money, like holdings, would be counted as credit.
In the balance of payments?
Yeah.
You're talking about the Pine Gulch stuff?
Yeah. Like
That's not involving more than one country. That's all within a neighborhood. And
Let's say he was in another country. Then it would be.
Don't confuse it.
All right.
You want to talk about hypotheticals over the summer, email me. All right. So let's go through some questions. Okay? We're going to skip around a little bit because some of these are rather basic, and I want to get to the stuff that might cause you to be a little concerned when you first see it on the test in a couple of days, if you do. So let's go to 42. Question 42. If a country has a current account deficit, which of the following must be true? This was the hardest question on the entire test in 2005.
Wasn't this the one that like 16%?
16% got this
No.
right. 84% got it
I
wrong.
can't remember anything else.
Do you remember the actual answer?
No, I don't.
B.
That's what I thought actually.
Really? Why?
Because
Dylan.
I know that current account is the opposite of capital account.
That's right.
And we just learned that.
And you just learned it. That's why we skipped to it. Right? Those two are supposed to balance. One way of saying it is the source of cash is supposed to equal the uses of cash.
Wait, am I right?
You're right, it's B.
What?
42, the answer is B. Any questions about 42?
I didn't say that.
He didn't. I was watching Jamie because I thought he might pull the trigger. All right, go to question 39. Now, when you're looking at that T account above for 39, securities...
39?
39. Securities could be any one of a number of different assets that company holds on to, that bank holds on to. Bonds would be an example, right? We've talked before about how some banks don't just set aside whatever is required by law and then loan everything. They might be more conservative. They might have chosen to put some of their money into bonds, which is what the Fed will go out and buy up when they're trying to increase the money supply. Somebody asked in class earlier today, so they could go to Jamie, It wasn't Jamie, it was actually TJ, but it says, so they could just go to you or me, the Fed, and say, hey, you got some bonds that we can buy?
No.
No, they could, but they don't typically do that because that's just not an efficient way of doing business. To make change happen quickly, they go to institutions that have large reserves of securities and other kinds of bonds. They buy those up, okay, like banks.
Is it D?
Amir says D. Show me with your fingers what you think the answer is. A, B, C, D, E.
Can you explain this one? Am I wrong?
Sure. What's the reserve requirement multiplied against? Is it 12% of the total reserves that they have to put aside? No, it's 12% of the deposits. So look at the right side. 12% of that 100 grand is what they have to put into required reserves. So 12 grand. Have they broken up the reserves into required and excess yet?
No.
No, it's just plain old total reserves. So they have to take 12 of the 15 and set it aside, right? What's the leftovers that they can loan?
3,000.
3,000. So C is the answer.
Oh. I thought this was one where you're multiplying everything.
Is it really?
Wait, can you-
Why do we even need to look at the right side?
Oh, that's
Wait,
a,
can you
Because
do that one over?
because the reserve requirement is times the right side.
so,
Yeah.
so then that was just
15, 70, 15.
if we're multiplying, then it should ask for the maximum change.
Yeah, I never got this.
Is that the wording on that, Mr. Gideon?
Yes. Yes, Amir.
Don't erase the bounce payments yet. Oh.
All right. All right, let's do a new example.
It was probably.
Yeah.
Should we do a new example?
Yeah, please.
I'll do that.
It sucks. Let's go with your papers.
All right.
You're not on my class.
Think of the dollar.
No. So let's say we've got $100,000 in demand deposits, which is the same thing as checkable deposits. Maybe this is more than one customer. And then, just like Slim, right? Slim had to set up a T account in the Pine Gulch story. This bank has to set up a T account. And remember, a T account tells a particular part of a story in a particular part of time. So where do we, for this question, kind of come in on the story, maybe halfway through the story? The bank's already been established. The bank has put aside $15,000 worth of reserves, but it hasn't broken it up into the pieces that have to be set aside according to law. Now the reserve requirement is 12%. The law says it's 12% of that, Jake. That's why you have to look at the right side. The law doesn't say 12% of this. It doesn't work like that. Okay? Right now this is just plain old reserves. All right? And let's say we keep the same numbers. $70,000 in securities. And then what do we have? Loans 15. Okay. Answer the question that's asked. Amir got tripped up a little bit because he goes, I'm doing the 1 over R times the change in. That wasn't what the question asked. The question didn't say, what is the maximum possible increase to the money supply? It just said, what can this bank loan? This bank. That's the key phrase. They don't say this bank, they say, yeah, they do. They say this bank. All right? So the Bank of Aussies. Let's say they are not lawbreakers. They like to comply with the law, but they also want to make as much money as possible without completely going out on the ledge and starting to cash in on some of these bonds, perhaps. Right? They don't touch their securities. They don't change that. Then what are they allowed to do by law? Well, after they break this up, right, they have to put aside 12% of 100,000, so 12,000 of this becomes required reserves. What do they have left over? Part of excess reserves. They got 3 grand. Right? And break it up. If it just says total reserves, you don't know which kind is which. Right? It's like saying the student population at Chaminade is 1,200 kids. Right? We haven't broken it up into boys and girls. 2 different groups. Same thing with this. Just total reserves isn't specific enough to know how much they can loan out and still comply with the law. Okay? So that's why that's the answer. Now that's just the answer for this bank. So the answer to this bank if they use that kind of a phrase, is 3 grand. What if they say, how much by the banking system?
Bless you.
Bless you. That's 1 over R times the change in ER. What if they say overall or in general? The overall increase. This is increase to the money supply, right? It would be 1 over R times the change in R.
Can you do those as examples?
Sure. There's a lot of different ways to ask questions like these. I'll give you one example. So let's say you've got some bank.
So, by the banking system, so it depends on, you have to read like the last sentence really carefully then.
You really do.
Okay.
Yeah, you get a good question.
I hate all of you.
I hate some of you.
Let's keep it simple, all right? They have 15,000, this bank, in demand deposits, all right? 2,000 of it is in required reserves. The rest of it are in loans. We're at a further point in the story than we were with this movie, so to speak, all right? And then something happens. They take on a new customer, all right? Mr. Spire walks in. And he says, I want to be a new customer. I want to deposit, oh,
I don't know.
5 grand.
Yeah, boy.
5.
Want to open up a checking account.
5.
I want to change this number real quick. I'm going to go to 1,500 because it'll work out better for this. And 13.5.
I don't think they'll do that on tests.
Change the question?
You can't change them.
Yeah, right. If only. All right, so he walks in, and this bank says, fine, no problem. We'll open up an account for you.
Mr. Davis.
Of course. Push yourself, Gideon. Come on now. All right. How much new lending can this bank do after Mr. Spire walks in?
4,000.
4,000?
No.
Wait,
Why do you say that?
What's the required
I'm the
reserve
same
rate?
boat as you.
It's 4,500.
What's the R cubed?
I'm right. You give
It's a
me
good
that
question.
look. 4,500.
What is the R cubed? Can you figure it out with this information?
Yeah.
What was the required reserve ratio?
45.
10.
That's why I changed it.
10.
10%, right? 10%?
Oh,
Yeah.
Isn't it 10% right now?
Yeah, it is.
10%, 5,000.
If they put aside 10%, because of course the Villa Diego's a very law-abiding citizen, 10%, and then allow out the rest. Same thing applies when they have a new customer walk in. So this new customer walks in, they're going to put 10% of this aside. What is that?
500.
500. So they're going to add, what?
sorry, why is it 10% of 5,000 instead of 15,000?
It's always, this is always applied to the liability side, to your
Yeah.
deposits.
So is it?
Same thing over here. It was 12% of your deposits.
Which one to apply it
That was
to?
already there. The 15.
Oh, right.
We started with this, and then something new happened. Spire walks in. Okay? So walks in, deposits 5,000. How much can Villa Diego loan? What's the most without breaking the law of this 5 grand?
4,500.
4,000.
Well, if he sets 10% aside of this, just like he already had in the beginning, this becomes 2 grand total.
Oh, yeah, you're right, right.
So that's 500 of this.
Right.
Now he can do an additional 4,500.
Okay. Because you gave 500 out, which is 10% of 5,000.
That's right. We set aside 10% of this. The rest of it is what they can do. So that's the answer to this question. How much can this bank, how much additional lending can this bank do? In this example with these numbers, there's your answer. Now, what if they said, what is the maximum possible increase to the money supply that the banking system can create. Assuming two things, there is no cash leakage along the way, and that each bank loans the max,
Loan it.
or has no excess reserves. It takes those excess reserves and always turns it into loans. All right? Assuming that, which formula do you use by the banking system is this. So it would be to answer a question like that, and you might have these numbers, you might have 3 questions related to the same bank situation, 3 different questions, right? It's 1 over R times the change in ER. So it's 1 over 0.1, 0.10, times what? What's the change in excess reserves?
4,500.
4,500. That's right.
Look at me.
Look at you.
Look at you.
Wait,
As the Joker said, look at you go. Right?
why 1.10?
What's that?
Because it's just the reserve.
That's a,
This,
The rate. It's the rate.
that's what this refers to. It's the same thing.
So it's, wow.
And your excess reserves are just
The leftovers that you could turn into loans after you set aside what you have to set aside.
per.
Now, what if they ask the question one different way? They say, what's the maximum possible increase in the money supply? Period.
Well, then it's R.
That includes Jake now. They don't say the banking system, then they're saying it's okay to include Jake.
Go to the deposits.
So you go 1 over that times 5,000.
5,000.
So these are all different answers, right? You got this for this one. You've got this for this one. Okay. You take an AP over the summer or no?
me.
Yeah.
I'm listening though.
Well, some people have been eavesdropping because they're going to take it in the summer. So
Wait, why is it 5,000? For 1,000.
why is what?
Why is it 5,000?
1 over 0.1 is 10.
Because we're counting it from this point. We're counting it earlier in the process because I said it's this question. This question, it's going to look like that. This question, your answer is going to look like that.
Why would it be 20,000?
There are 2,000.
20,000?
Well, like adding
Yeah,
the 15.
yeah.
No. This was sitting there, and they're saying, as a result of Jake's deposit, how much more?
So
So they're only focusing on this piece.
one of them is saying like,
All depends on when you ask the question. They say, as a result of Jake's deposit, there's the answer. If they said, all right, what about this bank that we just plopped in on and has this sitting here? It might be a different answer. Okay, so the question is, as a result of Jake's deposit, what's the maximum possible increase to the money supply? Boom.
and if they
Because
say
this
overall,
is Jake's deposit at $5,000.
If they say overall, it doesn't include.
Overall, same thing.
I know, but it doesn't include you having to break it down to 4,500.
Nope.
I don't
And
care.
then if it's excess reserve.
Because you're taking it right from the start, at the $5,000 point in the story. But if they say just the banking system, you have to fast forward a couple of chapters on the DVD and go to this part of the story.
Why is it 4,500?
For this,
Well, like just like in general, like the loans. Like why is it
this is the new amount of lending that this bank can do after Jake walks in, and they set aside 10% of that to this area. What do you have left over? You have 4,500 after you put 10% of this aside into required reserves.
Okay.
Okay? All right, let's do another question. Go to question 45, please. 45.
But then also, you took less
We only have about 15 minutes. 45.
Yeah.
What about it? Got it. How many got this wrong? None. An increase in this. Oh.
Don't get intimidated by the phrase capital stock. The stock of coffee is the amount of coffee you have. Stock of glasses, jewelry, is what you have in stock. Capital stock is just financial capital in stock. So what's going to happen? What do you think the answer is?
I'm gonna go
A, B, C, D, or E?
I don't know, for some reason. It's most likely to.
It's either C or D.
I think it's C.
The answer is C.
Get out of here.
Yay. I mean,
You're going to have
totally won.
You're going to have money flow in. That's one of the situations we drew for the exchange markets, right? Money's going to flow into the country where real interest rates are rising. Okay, so capital stock is going to increase in the United States. And if that happens, then the demand for the dollar is going to shift right, and that makes the value of the dollar go up.
Why would
Right?
it increase? It just says, increase in investment. I see.
All right, let's do 44. 44. This is exactly what's being talked about in current events right now. A deficit reduction policy. Not necessarily the Federal Reserve reversing that action, but
I'm just gonna get.
so the first two columns are fiscal policy. The second two columns are monetary policy.
What number are we on?
44.
Discount rate is loan to banks.
It's the Federal Reserve loaning to commercial banks. Federal funds rate is from bank to bank, commercial bank to commercial bank. The majority of the country missed this one.
Majority did not get it.
Well, you've seen this question more than once too.
Yeah, this is confusing me.
I think I got this one the first time.
I'm so confused.
All right, take it one step at a time. So the first part says the government implements deficit reduction.
Yes.
So fiscal policy, if you're going to reduce your deficit, what do you have to do if you're a politician? Reduce your deficit. Deficit is when you spend more than you bring in. Aren't you going to have to raise
You
taxes,
raise that and spend more.
lower spending, or both?
Yes, you do opposite.
Right, so
Don't get that
that's right.
spent, like, mixed up with debt.
This is not trying to get out of a recession. This is a different goal.
No, it's
We
not.
talked about this.
Because deficit sounds like debt sometimes. That's what I have.
Yeah, increase taxes, increase.
Oh, we're trying to get out of a recession?
No, it doesn't say anything about recession. It says a deficit reduction
I'm saying it sounds
policy.
like that, so
Does it
sometimes
mean
you-
less
Yeah, that's what I'm
spending?
confused about.
A deficit is just like when you're spending way too much, so you want
Right.
to stop spending.
Less
Right.
spending?
What do you call
Yeah,
it when
you
you're
wanna-
spending way too little?
Isn't it
What's the
B?
opposite of deficit?
That's a surplus.
That's what I
What's the
have.
When you have
opposite?
leftovers.
So you're going to increase
Deficit
taxes,
reduction, you increase taxes, you lower spending,
Yeah.
and then it
increase.
reverses.
All right. So do we all agree that it's got to be B or C?
Yeah.
First of all,
Yes.
you got to increase taxes. You got to decrease government spending. All right, fine.
Which one?
Well, then what's that going to lead to, by the way? Is AD going to shift left or right when the government does that?
Left.
It's going to shift left. Okay. Now, it says then the Federal Reserve does something to reverse those changes. So which way does AD have to move now, thanks to the Federal Reserve?
Back right.
Has to move back to the right. So what makes it move back to the right
B.
with the reserve ratio? Should they increase or decrease it?
Decrease it.
Decrease it. What about the discount rate?
Yes.
You should decrease it. If you're not going to do anything, then that'll work too.
That's
So the
just
answer is B.
B.
Yes.
All right?
They wouldn't have
So
one.
there's some mental gymnastics on this one, right?
They wouldn't
You got to flip backwards, then flip forwards, and then pick the right answer. That's like a mental gymnastics question.
They wouldn't have one where it's like between B and then another one where it's like the discount rate decreasing, because that would be the same.
Say that again.
Like they wouldn't have another one like E that was identical to B, but the discount rate would decrease. They wouldn't do
No,
that.
Dylan, not everyone's insurance.
Probably not. But you know what I've told you? I said there might be more than one reasonable answer. If they did that for E, you'd pick E because that's a better answer, right?
It has a stronger effect on it.
Stronger effect. If they did that,
They would cancel.
I would literally write to the College Board and go, "What an unfair question."
Amir was on
But I'll never know because it's 2011. They weren't not going to publish this exam, so
We'll tell you.
Wait, they only publish
Not
the,
supposed to.
the even years?
every 5 years.
5 years.
Oh.
Yeah, that's why we're looking at 2005. They were supposed to